Rain smacked against the bathroom window in staccato bursts, each drop echoing through the narrow edge tile as I crouched beneath the sink, wrench in hand, chasing the drip from the ever-sprained faucet joint. My shirt clung damply to my back, not from sweat but from ambient chill. It was one of those Tuesday mornings that felt pointless before coffee, like the universe had already decided today should start wet and gray. I'd barely finished tightening the nut and turned to go back to the kitchen when my phone buzzed against the counter and startled me. It flashed information that didn't belong in any routine morning. Monthly installment of $3,827.16 is now due for your mortgage loan of $600,000. My mouth went dry, and I nearly dropped the wrench. Mortgage? $600,000? For what? I had no mortgage. No house under my name. I've never owned anything of that value. My jaw tightened and my heart stuttered in my chest like something had flipped a switch. I dropped the wrench with a metallic clang, the tool rolling toward the drain in slow motion while I seized my phone again, trying to steady the accelerating pulse in my throat. I scanned it again, eyes darting over the fine print. It called me the borrower me, but how? My fingers shook when I scrolled through the notice. Fraud, scam, it had to be. I yanked the car keys off the rack and headed to my car faster than I realized. My mind raced. What if someone had stolen my identity? Or worse, what if it was a mistake I couldn't correct before it cost me something I didn't even know I'd spent? The rain turned to mist on my windshield as I drove, head pounding, muscles locked. By the time I reached the branch of Stanton National, I felt suspended between disbelief and dread. Inside, the bank lobby buzzed with the normal hum. Typing, talking, coffee clinks. I checked in, hands clammy around the appointment ticket, and waited as if I could breathe life into the next moment just by will alone. The teller paged me to a window labeled Mortgage Services, and I forced a greeting as I slid into the seat. The bank officer, woman in a gray blazer with a slow, professional smile, glanced up. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "I received this notification," I said, showing my screen. Her expression stayed flat. She tapped a few keys and printed something. My name, date of birth, the last four of my SSN, signature. All exactly mine. I stared at the paper, the edges crisp between my fingers, and something in me cracked. It felt unreal. I shook my head. I've never taken out a mortgage. I've never applied for anything. I pressed. Yet it has all my details. Name, birthday, social, even my signature. I exhaled, voice quivering, not sure whether to laugh or break. The teller tapped back into her screen. "Are you sure you haven't signed somewhere online?" she asked gently, leaning forward. Sometimes people forget. But I knew. No matter how scattered I'd been last year, I hadn't signed for a house, and certainly not $600,000 of debt. She nodded slowly. "Let's escalate it," she said, and connected me with a compliance officer named Chloe. Chloe came with a calm efficiency and a file thicker than I carried baggage after a breakup. She started walking me through the process. "We'll verify you, check the documents, contested signatures, all of it." Everything she said swelled inside me like I was drowning in papers and possibilities. Every syllable made the world feel unnavigable. I posed the question I'd been afraid to ask. What if someone forged it all? She looked seriously at me. "Then we have to trace the chain of signatures. It's possible it's a forgery. But under current terms, until proven otherwise, the obligations rest with you, the borrower." The weight of it hit me like a sledgehammer. Not just the physical some 600,000, but the insult, the violation. Someone had built a life in my name and suddenly expected me to pay for it. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't catch breath. "Someone is living a life I didn't sign up for," I said, voice wavering. "Someone's taken my identity." Chloe nodded, ushering me into a side office. "What we need is a copy of every mortgage, every previous debt we have under your name. You'll help us collect signatures, do comparisons. We'll have experts." I stared at her. Experts. As if identity theft and elegant forgery were suddenly routine. Like they made it happen in a cubicle somewhere, tile floors and flickering fluorescent lights. My stomach churned, adrenaline switched to fear. I thought of all the mornings I'd given Brielle coffee before leaving for work, how I always double-checked locks and bills, and this lie, now manifest, staring back in front of me. A life unknown, constructed perfectly, waiting for me to pay its dues. Chloe slid a form across the desk. Sign here to authorize the investigation. My pen trembled. I stared at the line. One signature, and I was pulling the thread. I dipped the pen and signed. For me. For reality. I left the bank with a stack of photocopied files, a reproduction of the document with that other, me, curved signature, same name, but not mine. I stood in the drizzle and tried to collect what was left of myself under 18 years of ID history, credit reports, everything poised like a house of cards I'd never invited them to build. Back home, the faucet still dripped. The wrench lay neglected in the sink. Rain had turned the driveway to mud. I stared at my phone again. Mortgage due. But this time, that message marked the start of something. The first crack in the facade someone else had built around my name. And I knew I wouldn't stop until I had answers. Until I either reclaimed my name or watched them dismantle everything behind it, brick by brick. And so it began. I couldn't bring myself to sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the notification on my phone, the phantom loan payment looming like a silent threat. I'd never imagined my life would be invaded like this, but now it was everywhere, like a stain on every thought. The next morning, I made coffee I couldn't drink and sat at the table staring at the rain-streaked window. I had to know. I called the bank, the line buzzing and crackling before a polite woman answered. Yes, we can email the full document package to you, sir, she said, as though I'd ordered a pizza. I gave her my email and waited. An hour later, it arrived in my inbox. A thick PDF file that felt heavier than anything I'd ever held in my hands. I clicked it open and scrolled through the pages. My name at the top, in neat black letters, Jared Miles. My address, my employer, my social security number, every detail exactly as it should be. My heart thudded in my ears. There was even a page with my signature. I leaned closer, scrutinizing every curve, every flourish, every letter. It was good. Too good. A perfect imitation, except for the way the pen line dipped slightly at the end, something I never did. But it was enough to fool a bank, enough to make a lender believe I'd signed on the dotted line for a house I didn't even know existed. I flipped to the next page and nearly dropped the laptop. There, in bold letters, was the borrower information. Borrower, Jared Miles. Co-resident, Brielle Miles. My wife. My pulse skidded. My mouth went dry. I didn't understand at first. Why would her name be there? And then the pieces started to click into place, like a lock snapping shut. My wife had used my name, my identity. She'd taken out a loan, our loan, but without me, using my signature, my details, everything that made me, me. A wave of disbelief washed over me, cold and sudden. I felt like I'd stepped off a cliff into nothing. I scrolled through the contract in a daze, reading every line, every clause. Adjustable rates, insurance requirements, penalty clauses, signatures, initials. Each page felt like a betrayal, like a story someone else wrote with my name at the top. Brielle. I thought of her smile, the way she laughed when we made breakfast together, the way she used to reach for my hand under the table. How could she? How could she build an entire house of lies on my back? I closed the laptop and pushed it away. My hands trembled. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I couldn't even breathe properly. My chest felt like it was caving in, every rib a cage. I picked up the laptop again and opened the PDF, forcing myself to look at every signature, every initial. I couldn't let myself get lost in the shock. I needed to understand the scope of what she'd done. The loan was for a house in Fairview, a town I'd driven through once, but never stepped foot in. The address was listed right there, 48 Greenway Lane. I'd never seen it, never heard her mention it. She'd built a second life, one I wasn't invited to. I wondered what it looked like. Did she plant roses in the yard? Did she pick the color of the shutters? My mind kept looping. Why didn't she just tell me? Why did she need to fake my name? I opened a search tab and typed the address into the real estate website. The photos came up, a two-story colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. The listing described it as the perfect family home. I felt sick. A perfect family home. But whose family? My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask every question that burned in my chest. But deep down, I already knew. She'd lied to me. She'd planned this. She'd hidden it all. I stared at the photos for a long time, imagining her there, hosting parties, sipping wine on the porch while I was in our apartment, believing in the life we shared. I saw it all, clear as day. Her late-night calls, the way she'd started locking her laptop, Those sudden weekend trips to her cousin's place. All the time she'd insisted on separate taxes, separate finances. I chalked it up to her wanting independence. God, I trusted her. That was my mistake. I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Every memory felt like it had a crack running through it now, like a mirror someone had smashed. I thought about all the times she'd brushed me off when I asked about money, about the way she'd changed her passwords, the way she'd laughed off questions. I'd been so blind. And she'd counted on that. She'd counted on me loving her too much to see the truth. When I finally opened my eyes, the contract still glowed on the screen. My name at the top, her name beside it. It felt like a tombstone for a marriage I didn't know was dying. I tried to imagine what she'd say if I confronted her. Would she deny it? Would she cry? Would she blame me? I didn't know. And part of me didn't care. I deserved better than this. I deserved my own life back, the one she'd stolen piece by piece. I closed the file and set my laptop down with trembling hands. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened screen, tired eyes, clenched jaw. A man who'd lost more than money. A man who'd lost trust. I took a deep breath. I couldn't let this destroy me. I needed answers, and I needed proof. I would gather every piece of evidence I could find. I would track down every signature, every notary, every lie she'd told. I would take back my name, my life, my soul. Because if she thought she could erase me with a forged signature, she was wrong. I was still here, and I was going to fight. One page at a time, one lie at a time, until the truth was all that remained. It's funny how the smallest things can loom so large in the rearview mirror of hindsight. All those patterns I should have noticed, the signs that seemed innocuous at the time, now felt like neon lights pointing at the truth I'd refused to see. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light gray and unkind, a cold cup of coffee untouched by my side. The loan papers lay in front of me like a crime scene, every signature a fingerprint I couldn't ignore anymore. The memory of Brielle's late-night calls echoed in my head. How she'd slip out to the porch to talk, always with the same forced smile when she came back in. Work stuff, she'd say, or just checking on the cousin. I believed her because I wanted to, because I loved her. She'd always been good at covering her tracks. Her laptop, once an open book, had become a locked fortress. Just for privacy, she'd told me, her voice smooth, her eyes dancing. I trusted her, thinking that couples could have their own space. I told myself she was entitled to her independence. How noble that sounded then, like a modern husband respecting his wife's boundaries. I didn't see that she was building walls to keep me out. She started taking sudden weekend trips to her cousin's place, a cousin I'd met once at a wedding and never again. I joked about it. You've never been that close before, I'd said. She'd laughed it off with that musical tone that always melted my doubts. We're reconnecting, she'd said, and I'd let it go. Then there was the tax thing. We'd always filed jointly, sharing deductions and splitting refunds. But last year she'd insisted we file separately. It's cleaner, she'd said, less complicated. She'd waved away my confusion with a dismissive hand, her wedding ring glinting like a promise I didn't know was already broken. I'd shrugged, because I didn't want to fight. Because I thought we were a team. That was my mistake. Thinking a marriage was a team sport when she'd already drafted me into a game I didn't know the rules for. I stood up and rummaged through the pile of unopened mail on the counter. There was one envelope that caught my eye, addressed to me from Lexan Financial. My name typed neatly, as if it belonged to someone who knew what the hell they were doing. I ripped it open and read, "Thank you for your recent inquiry regarding mortgage pre-approval." My stomach turned. I hadn't made any inquiry. The date on the letter was 6 months ago, around the time she'd started talking about dream homes and fresh starts. I dug deeper and found another envelope from Liberty National. Same typeface, same polished tone. "Congratulations on your pre-approval." I laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. Congratulations? For what? For being played? Brielle had built an entire house of lies, and I'd been too blind to see it. She'd used bricks made from my identity, my details, my signature, my trust, and built her fantasy life on it. Every time I thought about her, the image split like glass under a hammer. The woman who'd shared my bed, my meals, my secrets, she'd also stolen my name. I slammed the envelopes down and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not now. Not after everything. I reached for my laptop and pulled up the bank's customer portal. My account details stared back at me, the numbers more real than the person I'd loved. I opened the transaction history and saw it. Payment drafts, notifications I'd ignored. She'd been so careful. Small withdrawals, transfers that wouldn't raise alarms. A slow bleed instead of a fatal wound. She'd counted on me being too trusting to notice. I scrolled down to the loan application. My signature glared at me like an accusation. I zoomed in, studying every line, every stroke. It was a near-perfect imitation, but it lacked the small flourish I always added at the end, the flick of the pen I'd done since I was 15. I felt a grim satisfaction. That would be her mistake. That would be the flaw that would bring her down. I printed the documents and laid them out like puzzle pieces on the table. Each line, each word felt like a confession. I started to see her patterns even more clearly, like an artist's signature left in the brushstrokes of a painting. The late-night calls, the separate taxes, the locked laptop, the unopened mail, the carefully timed absences. She'd built a pattern, and I'd missed it because I'd wanted to believe she was still on my side. I closed my eyes and remembered the way she used to hold my hand in public, how she'd smile at me across a crowded room. It all felt like theater now, rehearsed and polished for an audience of one. I thought about all the times I'd woken up at night and found her gone, standing in the hallway on the phone, whispering. Just checking on Mom, she'd said, or the office call. Lies that slithered through the dark like snakes. I believed her because I'd wanted to, because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that I'd been living with a stranger. Now, every whisper, every glance over her shoulder, every privacy conversation felt like a red flag I'd ignored. And I hated myself for it. The anger came next, white-hot and unrelenting. I felt it burn in my chest as I slammed the laptop shut. She'd stolen my name. She'd stolen my trust. She'd built a house with bricks I'd carried for her. And now, she'd left me to pay for the life she'd built with my identity. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to be the victim in her story. I'd played the fool for long enough. I looked at the stack of papers one last time. The signatures. The letters. The locked laptop. The unopened mail. Patterns I should have noticed, but didn't. Patterns I'd ignored in the name of love. I wasn't that man anymore. I was done being blind. I was done playing her game. It was time to play my own. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. I took a breath that felt too heavy for my lungs and walked into the bank's compliance office like I was stepping into a courtroom. The walls were lined with thick files and gray paint, giving the place a sterile, hospital-like feel that made me itch for fresh air. But there was no running from this. I needed answers. I needed proof. And I needed to look someone in the eye when they told me how my name had been signed on a mortgage loan I never agreed to. Avery Chen introduced herself in a voice so calm it almost felt rehearsed. She was sharp-eyed, her hair pinned back in a tight bun that made her face seem even more angular, like everything about her was designed for precision. She gestured for me to sit, then opened a large file folder with a neatness that made me suspect she'd done this hundreds of times before. "Mr. Miles, thank you for coming in," she said, sliding a document across the desk. "This is the application packet that corresponds to the mortgage loan in question. I'd like you to take a look at the signature page." My pulse thudded in my throat. I took the page, feeling the weight of every expectation, every assumption the bank had made. The signature glared at me in clean, looping letters. My name, in black ink, as if I'd signed it in a moment of perfect composure. But it wasn't mine. I leaned forward, studying the signature, feeling anger tighten the muscles in my neck. The curve of the J was too neat, too practiced. Like someone had studied my signature 100 times, practiced it until it was almost perfect. Almost. But they'd missed the pressure point on the M, where I always pressed harder by habit, the slight skip I made after the Y. It wasn't there. It was too smooth, too flawless, like a counterfeit bill that smelled too clean. I looked up at Avery. Her eyes followed mine, reading every flicker of disbelief on my face. She nodded slowly, as though confirming something she'd already guessed. "It's good," she said softly. "But it's not yours." A bitter laugh escaped me, dry and humorless. "It's good," I repeated, my voice cracking. "But not mine." "That's comforting." Her expression didn't change. "It's more common than you'd think," she said. "Identity theft. Fraudulent signatures. It's a growing problem. Usually, it's strangers. But sometimes," she let the word hang there, heavy as a lead weight. "Sometimes it's not," I finished for her, my voice suddenly sharp. My hands curled into fists in my lap, pressing against my thighs. Sometimes it's the person sleeping next to you. She paused, then continued. The problem is that until we prove otherwise, the legal obligation is still on you. She pointed to the signature. Unless you can prove that this is a forgery, you're on the hook for this loan. The air rushed out of my lungs in a slow hiss. $600,000. A house I'd never seen. A life I'd never lived. And now it was my problem. My responsibility. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind spinning with questions. How do I prove it? I asked. My voice felt small, the question too big. She leaned back, folding her hands. We start by comparing signatures, notarizations, witness statements, anything that shows you weren't the one who signed. Sometimes there's a notary log. Sometimes it's surveillance. But the burden of proof is on you, Mr. Miles. And it's not easy. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. She forged it. I said quietly, almost to myself. She forged my signature. Avery watched me for a moment, her eyes unreadable. If that's true, she said, we'll need to gather everything. Every document you can find. We'll need a paper trail. We'll need to show that you weren't there, that you didn't sign. And even then, it might take time. Time, money, energy, things I felt too depleted to give. But what choice did I have? I couldn't let this stand. I couldn't let her get away with it. I exhaled, the breath rattling in my chest. Okay, I said finally. What do I do first? She pulled a pin from her breast pocket and clicked it with a decisive snap. Start with the documents you have at home. Tax returns, previous mortgages, anything with your signature. We'll compare them to the loan document. She paused. And if you find any correspondence, emails, texts, letters, anything that shows your wife's involvement, bring that too. I nodded slowly, my mind already reaching for the file cabinet in the study, the shoebox under the bed, the stack of old tax forms gathering dust in the closet. Every scrap of paper might hold the clue I needed. Avery's gaze softened, just a fraction. I know this is difficult, she said. But you're not alone. We're going to figure this out. Just take it one step at a time. Her words settled into my bones like a fragile lifeline. A thread I could hold on to as I walked out of the bank and back into the gray, drizzling afternoon. The clouds hung low, pressing down on the world. My head felt like it might split from the weight of it all. I opened the car door and sat for a long time, hands resting on the wheel, staring at nothing. She'd done this. Brielle, the woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I'd loved. The thought made my skin crawl. My heart thud with a slow, burning anger that started at the base of my spine and curled up into my skull. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the debt she'd left me with, or the realization that she'd been living a life I'd never been a part of. I leaned my head against the seat and closed my eyes. I would find proof. I would find the paper trail she hadn't thought to erase. Because I knew her too well, she was careful, but she was also arrogant. She believed she'd covered every angle, but she hadn't counted on me fighting back. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes. The first crack had formed, and with it, the first taste of resolve. She might have signed my name, but she didn't own it. Not anymore. The house felt colder than usual as I started my search, the walls heavy with silence. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter that had once filled these rooms, hers and mine, but mostly hers. Now, all I could hear was the steady tick of the clock on the kitchen wall and the rustle of paper as I pulled open drawers, rifling through files and boxes. I'd spent the night in a haze of questions, and now, in the quiet light of morning, I knew what I had to do. Proof. That's what Avery had said. Proof was the difference between being crushed by her debt and setting myself free. I started with the hall closet, where we kept old tax documents and receipts, the leftovers of years we'd shared or pretended to share. The box was heavier than I remembered, filled with manila folders, envelopes, and random notes. I spread them out on the kitchen table, each one a puzzle piece that might hold the key to unraveling this mess. My fingers worked quickly, flipping through forms and letters. Tax records, pay stubs, insurance statements, each one with my name, my signature. I felt like I was staring at 1,000 versions of myself, each more unfamiliar than the last. I found a folder labeled Mortgage 2019. Inside were payoff statements from the old apartment we'd rented, closed accounts, proof that I'd never carried a mortgage before. I felt a flicker of hope, a small light in a dark room. This was my story, my real story, and it didn't include a $600,000 loan. I added it to the growing stack on the table. Next, I checked her old desk, the one she'd stopped using after she'd started locking her laptop and spending more time at the office. I pulled open the bottom drawer, expecting the usual stale pins, unopened bills, maybe a lipstick she'd forgotten. But tucked between a stack of printer paper and a dusty planner was a small, leather-bound notary lock. My heart skipped a beat. I'd seen her with it once or twice, but I'd never asked. I'd trusted her. Stupid. I flipped through the pages, each entry written in her neat, precise handwriting. Mostly routine stuff, signatures witnessed for neighbors, the occasional package delivery. But one entry jumped out at me, circled in blue ink like a secret waiting to be revealed. Mortgage application, Beaumont Title Services. Witness, Callie Hart. My breath caught. Callie Hart. A name I recognized from Brielle's stories, a friend she'd reconnected with last year, the one she always said she owed a favor. A favor. Now I knew what that favor was. She'd signed my name in front of a notary, someone she knew, someone she trusted to keep her secret. A sick feeling twisted in my gut as I stared at the page. She hadn't even needed to force it. She just needed a friend to look the other way. I took a shaky breath. This was it. The crack in her plan. The thread I could pull. I closed the notary log carefully, like I was handling a live wire. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Callie Hart's number glared at me like an unspoken challenge. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. What would I say? What could I say? My chest felt like it was caving in, but I pressed the call button anyway. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then her voicemail picked up. Hey, it's Callie. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you. I swallowed hard. My voice felt raw. Hey, Callie, I said, forcing my tone steady. This is Jared Miles. I'm calling about a signature you witnessed at Beaumont Title Services. I just need to ask, were you actually there when I signed the mortgage papers? I paused, every word like a rock in my mouth. Please call me back. It's important. I ended the call and set the phone down, my hand shaking. The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the notary log again, the ink smudged in places like a secret that didn't want to stay hidden. I tried to imagine the moment she'd sat there, pen in hand, pretending to be me. Did she smile as she signed? Did she feel powerful? Or was it just another chore, another box to tick on her way to the life she wanted? The anger simmered beneath my ribs, slow and hot. She'd forged my name, stolen my identity, and left me holding the bag. But she hadn't counted on me finding this. She hadn't counted on me fighting back. The phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me. It was Callie. I took a deep breath and answered, my voice as calm as I could make it. Hey, Callie, I said. Jared. Her voice was cautious, like she already knew why I was calling. Yeah, I need to ask you something. That mortgage application at Beaumont Title. Were you actually there when I signed it? There was a pause, heavy with meaning. Jared, She hesitated, the sound of her breath filling the space between us. Look, I didn't think it was a big deal. Brielle asked me to notarize it. She said you'd already signed. I felt my stomach drop. But you didn't see me sign, I said, my voice low and steady. Silence. No, she whispered. I closed my eyes. That was all I needed. The final piece of the puzzle. Thank you, I said, my voice tight. That's all I needed to know. She started to say something else, but I hung up. I couldn't listen to her excuses. The truth was enough. I set the phone down and stared at the notary log, at the entry that had cracked the foundation of Brielle's lie. My pulse felt like a hammer in my chest. I had proof now, proof that she'd forged my name, that she'd lied to me, to the bank, to everyone. I had a way out. I gathered the papers, the notary log, the bank documents, and stacked them in a neat pile. My hands still trembled, but my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. She'd built her life on my name, but I was about to reclaim it. One signature at a time, one lie at a time, I would dismantle the world she'd built with my identity. Because this time, the game was mine to play, and I intended to win. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple as I sat in my car outside a small office park that felt like a graveyard of half-finished dreams. The address on the card in my hand led me here. Lucian Brandt, real estate fraud investigator. His name alone sounded like it belonged in a thriller, and right now, my life felt like the worst kind of thriller, one where the main character was always one step behind. But I promised myself I wouldn't be that man anymore. I walked in and was met by a small waiting area with faded chairs and a water cooler that gurgled like a dying fish. The door to his office was ajar, and I could see him hunched over a file. He looked up as I knocked. A man with lines like cracked porcelain etched into his face, eyes that had seen too many bad endings. He wore a brown suit that had been pressed too many times and a tie that had once been bright but now looked tired, like the rest of him. "Jared Miles," he said, his voice low and measured. "Yeah," I said, stepping in. "Thanks for seeing me." He waved a hand, gesturing to the worn chair across from his desk. I sat, feeling every creak of the cheap upholstery. "Tell me everything," he said, leaning back. His eyes were sharp, alive in a way that made me feel like he could see right through me. I took a deep breath and laid it out. The loan, the forged signature, the notary log with Callie's name, the conversation that had confirmed my worst fear. I showed him the emails, the documents, the photos I'd taken of the signature. He listened without interruption, nodding at all the right moments, his hands folded like he was praying for me. When I finished, he leaned forward and laced his fingers together. "You're not the first," he said. "And you won't be the last. People like your wife," he spat the word like it tasted sour, "they get good at this. They know where the cracks are, and they know how to slip through them." He paused, studying me. "But you've got something most people don't." "What's that?" I asked, my voice rough. "You've got the paper trail," he said. "You've got the notary log, the phone call, the signatures that don't match. That's gold in my line of work. With the right moves, we can build a case the bank can't ignore." A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. "So what do I do?" He leaned back again, his chair squeaking. "You keep your head down. You don't confront her directly, at least not yet. She's probably got her own plan, and if she senses you're onto her, she'll bury every piece of evidence she can. You let me handle the digging. I've got contacts at the bank. I can talk to the right people. You just need to be patient and smart." I nodded, trying to swallow the anger that threatened to bubble over. "I can do that." He smiled, a thin line that didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Now, here's what you do next. You file a fraud report with the bank. Officially. That freezes the account. It makes it harder for her to move money around or make more withdrawals. Then you send me every document you have. Every email, every signature, every text. I'll put it together. When the bank's legal team sees the evidence, they'll have no choice but to investigate." He paused, studying me. "And remember, she's going to play the victim. She'll cry, she'll lie, she'll do anything to make you look like the bad guy. Don't take the bait. Stay calm. Stay focused." I nodded again, my throat tight. "Okay," I said. "I can do that." He handed me a thick envelope. "My contract," he said. "Sign it tonight. Send it back tomorrow. I'll start work as soon as I get it." I took the envelope and stood. My knees felt weak, but I managed to hold myself upright. "Thanks," I said. He didn't smile. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This is going to get messy before it gets clean. But if you stick with me, we'll get you out of this." I left his office as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in deep purple and gold. The air felt cooler now, the night breeze sharp against my face. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, the contract in my hands. This was it, my chance to fight back. When I got home, the house felt different, emptier, like it had finally decided it didn't want to be my home anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, signing the contract with Lucian's name staring back at me like a promise I hoped he could keep. While Brielle was out there posting Instagram reels of manifesting her dream home, I was building the case to reclaim my name. I knew she'd be curating her perfect life online. Hashtags, home decor, smiling selfies that hid the truth. But I didn't care. Let her smile for the camera while I gathered the proof to tear it all down. The next morning, I filed the fraud report with the bank. It felt like handing in an overdue assignment, but with a weight that pressed on my chest. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen until it finally confirmed. Fraud report submitted. I stared at the screen, the words blurry. Then I called Lucian and told him it was done. "Good," he said. "Now we wait." That was the hardest part. Waiting. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control again. This wasn't her game anymore. It was mine. And I was going to play it smarter than she ever dreamed I could. The invitation looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering, the kind of thing you send when you want the world to know you've made it. Housewarming celebration, it said in looping script. Join us for an evening of food, music, and laughter at our new home. It was a a twisted punchline to the mess she'd made with my name. But Brielle had never been one to hide in the shadows. She wanted the whole world to see her new prize, to bask in the glow of a house she'd built on the bones of my identity. I read the invitation twice before dropping it on the table, the paper curling like it couldn't bear to hold its own weight. She'd sent one to me too, like I was just another guest to her charade. Maybe she thought I'd be too embarrassed to show. Maybe she thought I'd crumble. But she didn't know I'd already spoken to the bank's legal team. They'd agreed to let me accompany Officer Avery for a discreet inspection that same day. I could have confronted her with shouting, with anger. I could have blown the whole thing up on the spot. But that would have given her the power she wanted, the drama, the chaos, the tears she could twist into sympathy. No, I wanted her to feel the ground shift under her feet, to realize the life she'd stolen wasn't hers to keep. So I let her believe I was away on business, the same way I'd let her believe she'd gotten away with everything else. I dressed in black slacks and a dark shirt, blending into the night like a shadow. I parked a few houses down and walked the last block, the steady thump of my heart a drumbeat in my ears. Her new sanctuary loomed ahead, lights glowing from every window, music spilling out into the night like a promise of something perfect. I paused at the edge of the lawn, watching people filter through the open front door. Laughter floated across the yard, her laughter bright and rehearsed. A photographer with a fancy camera flitted from group to group, snapping candid shots of smiling faces. I wondered how many of them knew. How many of them saw the woman she really was. Officer Avery waited at the curb, her badge clipped to her belt and a small folder in her hands. She gave me a nod, her eyes serious but calm. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "Let's do this." We approached the house together, our steps in sync like some twisted waltz. As we stepped onto the porch, the noise swelled. A sea of voices, clinking glasses, music that didn't seem to match the gravity of the night. I felt like an intruder in my own life, but the papers in Avery's hands were my shield. Inside, the place looked like a catalog come to life. White marble floors, chandeliers that dripped crystals like tears, oversized vases with carefully arranged flowers. Brielle had spared no expense. My stomach turned at the thought that every detail was funded by my name, my signature. I clenched my jaw and scanned the room until I saw her. She stood by the staircase, wearing a flowing white dress that made her look like a bride all over again. Her hair was perfectly curled, her makeup flawless. She held a glass of wine in one hand, her smile bright enough to light up a magazine cover. I felt a pang of something. Loss, maybe, or just the ghost of what I'd thought we were. I stood near the living room archway, pretending to admire the decor, a glass of water in my hand for camouflage. The conversations around me blurred into a dull hum. My eyes never left her. Then she turned and saw me. It was like watching a wave of realization crash over her face, her smile faltering mid-sentence, her eyes going wide with disbelief. How did you get in?" she stammered, her voice cracking like thin ice. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply turned and pointed to Avery, who stood calmly by the door, her badge glinting under the lights. Brielle's face went pale, the blood draining so fast it looked like she might faint. She staggered backward, her wine glass tilting, red drops splashing onto the pristine marble floor. Around us, the party continued, guests unaware, still laughing, still living in the illusion she'd built. But here, in this small pocket of truth, the world shifted. She saw it. I saw it. Avery saw it. "Brielle Miles," Avery said, her voice clear and authoritative. "We're here to inspect the property and verify the mortgage under investigation. Please cooperate." Brielle's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted to me, searching for the man who used to love her, who used to believe every word she said. But he wasn't here anymore. I stood still, my hands steady, my pulse even. I didn't need to scream or cry or demand answers. The evidence spoke for itself. The lies had finally met the light. For a moment, time froze. It was like every memory I had of her, every laugh, every kiss, every shared secret, dissolved in the space between us. What remained was a woman who'd built a palace on someone else's pain, and a man who'd finally reclaimed his name. I watched her stumble, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her friends started to notice, glancing over, whispers beginning to ripple through the room. The photographer lowered his camera, uncertain, The music felt too loud, too bright, like a party that had overstayed its welcome. I turned away, my chest tight but my heart steady. I didn't owe her any explanations. She'd written this ending the day she forged my name. All I had to do was let the truth speak. And as I stepped back into the night air, leaving her in the wreckage of her own creation, I realized that sometimes justice doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it comes with a quiet entry, a steady hand, and the knowledge that you were stronger than the lies that tried to bury you. I stood near the archway, glass of water in hand, as the noise of the party rumbled on around me. The music sounded too loud, too forced, a desperate attempt to drown out the truth that had just cracked the surface of Brielle's perfect world. I watched her standing by the staircase, her white dress hugging every curve like a designer's fantasy, the light from the chandelier bouncing off the crystal in her earrings. She looked like she'd won, like she'd built a life worth celebrating. And maybe that was the worst part, seeing her there, smiling, raising her glass to a room full of people who had no idea the foundation beneath her feet was about to give way. She was in the middle of laughing. Some over-rehearsed line I'd heard too many times, when her eyes flicked to me. It was like she'd been hit by a spotlight. Her laughter died in her throat, her mouth frozen mid-smile, her eyes wide with disbelief. I saw the question form before she even spoke. How did you get in? I could see her mind racing, trying to spin a lie even before the truth had fully landed. She opened her mouth, the words tumbling out, soft at first, then sharper. How did you get in here? She stammered. Her voice trembled, the brittle tone of someone who'd built her kingdom on stolen bricks. You're supposed to be. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just turned slightly and gestured to Officer Avery, who stood by the door with the same calm authority she'd carried through every conversation. Her badge caught the light, gleaming like a silent judge. Avery's presence alone spoke volumes, a living reminder that this wasn't a private matter anymore. It was official and unavoidable. Brielle's eyes darted between us, panic dancing in her pupils. She took a step back, her fingers trembling around the stem of her wine glass. I don't understand, she started, but the words faltered, the practiced charm evaporating in the heat of reality. Her shoulders tensed, her posture folding in on itself, and I could see the mask slip. The woman who'd forged my name, built her empire on my identity, was suddenly small, powerless. The party around us didn't stop, not at first. People kept chatting, oblivious to the earthquake that had just struck. But then the room seemed to tilt, as if a hush rolled through the crowd. The laughter softened, eyes turned toward us, one by one, like falling dominoes. I saw a woman with a glass of sangria freeze mid-sip, a man with a tie too bright for the occasion blink and lean toward his friend, whispering behind his hand. The photographer, who'd been snapping candid shots all evening, lowered his camera, the flash going dark. Even the music seemed to lose its nerve, the beat skipping awkwardly, fading into an uneasy silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every moment I'd spent collecting evidence, every night I'd lain awake rehearsing what I'd say. All of it led to this. I took a slow breath and let the anger settle into something sharper. I locked eyes with Brielle, my voice steady as I said, "You built this house with my name. My credit. My life. But tonight..." I paused, feeling the words gather weight. "Tonight I'm here to take it back." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes darted to the guests, to the photographer, to the glass in her hand. She looked like a woman drowning in her own lies, desperate for a lifeline that wouldn't come. I could see the calculations racing behind her eyes, how to spin it, how to charm her way out. But the presence of Officer Avery cut through her performance like a blade. Avery stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Miles," she said, each syllable deliberate, "we're conducting a review of the property under mortgage investigation. We have documented evidence of fraudulent signatures, and we need your cooperation." Her badge glinted again, an exclamation point at the end of a sentence that needed no other words. Brielle's face went pale, her lipstick smearing as she licked her lips, searching for the right lie, the right tone. I don't understand what's happening," she stammered, her voice pitching higher, the sweetness slipping away to reveal the desperation beneath. "Jared, you're overreacting. Let's talk about this privately." I shook my head, the decision already made. "We're past that," I said. "This isn't just between you and me anymore. You signed my name, took out a mortgage I never agreed to, built a life on lies, and left me to pay for it. My voice was even, steady, but I felt the fury simmering just below the surface, like a volcano waiting for the final spark. Tonight, everyone sees who you really are. A murmur spread through the crowd, a collective inhalation as the reality settled in. The woman they'd toasted, the woman they'd envied, wasn't the queen of her own castle. She was a fraud, a liar, a thief. Some of them took a step back, others leaned in, their curiosity outweighing their sympathy. Brielle's hands trembled so badly she had to set her glass down on the banister. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Jared, please." Her eyes pleaded with me, the tears gathering, ready to be deployed like a final defense. But they were too late. I took another breath, my chest rising and falling slowly. "I trusted you," I said, my voice softer now, not for her but for me. "I believed every word you said. But that trust is gone. And now," I gestured around the room, at the party, the guests, the false smiles crumbling under the weight of the truth. "Now you have to live with what you did." She sagged, her shoulders folding in, her mascara smudging as tears finally fell. The guests began to murmur more loudly, stepping back, their faces a mix of shock and pity and something else, judgment, maybe. Or maybe they were just grateful it wasn't them. Avery held out a hand, her tone measured. "Mrs. Miles, we need you to answer some questions." The authority in her voice left no room for argument. Brielle looked at me one last time, a look that held every memory we'd shared and every lie she'd told. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see the resolve in my eyes, the finality of it. And in that moment, as the last notes of her carefully orchestrated life dissolved into silence, I felt lighter than I had in months. Because the truth had come. Uninvited, unstoppable, and nothing she could say or do would change it. I stood there for a moment, the quiet in the room pressing down like a heavy blanket. It felt strange, after all that noise, to have the world so still. My hand, trembling only minutes before, felt steady now as I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the one I'd carried like a shield through every sleepless night, every whispered lie, every carefully hidden truth. I could feel the weight of it, not just in paper but in everything it represented, the betrayal, the stolen identity, the life she'd tried to build out of the wreckage of mine. Brielle watched me with eyes that no longer sparkled with that easy confidence she'd worn like a second skin. Instead, her gaze was dark and uncertain, the corners of her lips twitching as though searching for a smile that would no longer come. I saw a flash of something. Panic, maybe, or the last dying ember of the woman I'd once trusted. But it didn't matter. That woman was gone. What remained was a fraud wrapped in designer clothes, standing in a house built with my name. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The hush in the room was thick enough that every word carried, every syllable dropping like a stone in a still pond. I held the folder out, my grip steady as I placed it on the gleaming kitchen island in front of her. The evidence of everything she'd done, every signature she'd forged, every lie she'd told, it was all there, screaming the truth louder than I ever could. "Read it," I said, my voice low, but sharp enough to slice through the pretense. "Every page, every signature, every transaction. This is your dream house, Brielle. Built on fraud. Built on me." Her lips parted, the perfect pink of her lipstick suddenly smudged and wrong. "Jared," I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." My throat felt thick, but I swallowed it down. For once, let the truth speak louder than you. The guests were silent, shifting uncomfortably as they watched this private implosion unfold in a room too big for comfort. A few whispered, others sipped their drinks with trembling hands, and one woman actually took a step back, like the truth might be contagious. Brielle's fingers shook as she reached for the folder, the trembling spreading from her hands to her shoulders, her neck, until her entire body seemed to vibrate with the weight of what she'd done. She opened the first page and stared at her own signature, my name scrawled in her handwriting. Her breath caught, a small, sharp sound that might have been a sob or a gasp of horror. She flipped the page, and the next, each one a mirror reflecting her crime. I stood there, arms crossed, every muscle in my body tight with exhaustion and resolve. I thought I'd feel rage in this moment, or triumph. But all I felt was a hollow ache where love used to live. I'd loved her once. Loved the way she'd made me laugh, the way she'd kissed me in the rain, the way she'd held me on the worst days. But that woman was gone, buried under layers of lies and forged signatures. Brielle's eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill, but somehow didn't. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked like old paint. I didn't think, she started, but I cut her off with a single, measured breath. You didn't think I'd fight back, I said, the words even and cold. You thought I'd just accept the debt, the shame, the ruin you left behind. You thought you'd get to live here, host your parties, drink your wine, and smile at your guests while I paid for everything. I paused, feeling the room hold its breath. But you were wrong. I reached into the folder again, pulling out the notarized claim under investigation. The bank's official stamp glared back at her, red and final. I laid it on top of the stack like a verdict. The bank is voiding the mortgage, I said, my voice steady. They're freezing the account, investigating the fraud, and clearing my name. You won't get another dime from me. Not 1 cent. Because this, I gestured around the room, the house, the people, this was built on a lie. And I'm done paying for it. Her shoulders slumped, her carefully constructed mask crumbling before my eyes. The tears finally fell, but they looked different now, no longer weapons, no longer bait. Just tears. But I'd seen too many of them to trust the salt they carried. Jared, please, she whispered, reaching out as though she could bridge the chasm she'd carved between us. I never meant. I took a step back, my arms folding across my chest like a barrier. Don't, I said again. I'm not here for apologies. I'm not here for excuses. My voice was low but firm, like the steady beat of a drum. I'm here for closure, and I'm here to take back my life. Behind me, the guests began to move, some whispering, some leaving. The spell of her charm had broken, the golden thread of her lies unraveling in real time. The photographer packed his camera and slipped out the side door, the music now a muted throb that couldn't drown out the truth. Brielle stared at the folder, her hands limp at her sides. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But no one moved. No one spoke. She was alone now, and the realization etched itself into every line of her face. I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders, a weight that felt different than the one I'd carried all these months. It wasn't anger or hurt or even betrayal anymore. It was freedom. Freedom from the debt she tried to chain me to. Freedom from the lies that had kept me up at night. Freedom from the love I'd thought would save me but had only left me broken. I turned to leave, my steps slow but certain. As I passed her, I paused just long enough to meet her eyes one last time. You bought a house with my life, I said quietly. But this time, I'm not the one paying for it. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with clarity. And in that clarity, I found something stronger than anger, stronger than grief. I found myself. I stepped into the night, the cool air washing over me like a baptism. The world felt different now, brighter, somehow, despite the darkness. I could hear the murmurs from inside, the shocked whispers, the uncertain questions. But they didn't matter anymore. I'd done what I came to do. I'd reclaimed my name. As I walked down the driveway, I heard the sound of a chair scraping, a door closing, the echo of a life I was leaving behind. And with every step, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Because the truth had come, and I'd survived it. And now, I was free. Weeks passed in a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in months, a silence that was less like emptiness and more like a room I could finally breathe in. The paperwork had come through from the bank, officially voiding the mortgage, erasing the debt that wasn't mine, lifting the dark stain that had loomed over my life like a constant shadow. The day the letter arrived, I sat on the edge of my bed, the morning light slanting through the blinds, and read it over and over, letting the words sink in like water on parched soil. Mortgage account terminated due to proven fraudulent signature. 6 words that felt like the closing of a door and the opening of a window all at once. The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with peeling paint and a front door that creaked like an old man's knees. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my boxes stacked against the walls, my coffee cup in the kitchen sink. It wasn't much, but every corner felt like a piece of my life I'd reclaimed from her, from the house she'd built on lies, from the debt she tried to chain me to. Every time I turned the key in the lock, I felt a little more like myself. I wasn't the man she'd left behind. I was the man who'd fought his way out of her labyrinth, one lie at a time. I'd half expected to feel rage. Some final burning need for revenge that would push me to call her, to throw her words back at her, to demand an apology that I knew would never come. But instead, what I felt was quieter. Not forgiveness. No, I'd never forgive what she'd done, but a kind of acceptance that this was who she was, and I didn't have to carry her choices on my back anymore. She'd made her own cage. Now she'd live in it. And I'd walk free. Her silence had been deafening. She hadn't called. She hadn't texted. The last message she'd sent was a single line, as though she couldn't even muster the courage to call me by name. I didn't think you'd go this far. That was it. Like I was the one who'd crossed a line. Like she'd been the victim all along. I'd stared at that message for a long time before deleting it without replying. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I didn't know her that. She'd written her own ending, and I just turned the final page. Sometimes I wondered if she was still living in that house, surrounded by the echoes of a life she'd stolen. I imagined her parties had stopped, the laughter replaced by the creak of empty rooms. I wondered if the guests who'd clinked glasses with her that night still answered her calls, or if they'd learned the truth and moved on. But every time my mind drifted there, I pulled it back. Her choices were her own, her regrets hers to carry. I didn't have to live there anymore. I had my own address now. I'd changed, too. I felt it every time I passed a mirror, every time I signed my name on a delivery slip or an insurance form. That signature had once been a weapon she'd wielded. Now it was mine again. Every curve of ink a small victory. I'd reclaimed my identity, and with it, a piece of the man I'd almost lost. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was finally myself. I still went to the bank occasionally, partly to handle the final loose ends and partly because seeing my name on a screen without any hidden debts felt like a celebration. Avery always met me with that same steady calm, her eyes sharp but kind. She'd become an unexpected ally in all of this, a witness to my fight, a reminder that sometimes people really do stand beside you. On my last visit, she'd handed me a final document. Confirmation that my credit had been restored, the fraudulent loan erased from my history. She'd smiled as I read it, and for the first time in months, I let myself smile back. "Congratulations, Mr. Miles," she'd said. "You're clear." Officially, the way she'd said it, like she understood every mile I'd walked to get here, left me blinking hard. I thanked her, shaking her hand, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The sky felt wider, the air easier to breathe. I'd earned this freedom. I'd fought for it. Now, in the evenings, I'd sit on the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of coffee in my hand, and watch the city below. It wasn't the mansion she'd bought, the one with the marble floors and the chandeliers and the fancy invitations. But it was mine, every inch of it. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors polite, the walls thin enough that I could sometimes hear the hum of a guitar from the unit next door. It felt like living, real living, honest. No secrets lurking in the corners. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about everything that had happened, how close I'd come to losing myself completely, how easy it had been for her to forge a signature and build an entire life on it. But I'd also think about how I'd fought back, how I'd refused to let her story be my ending. I'd think about the day I'd confronted her, the way the room had gone quiet, the way the truth had filled the space like sunlight. And I'd remember the way I'd walked out, leaving her to face the house she'd built on lies. That was the moment I'd known, really known, that I was done with her, done with the pain, done with the shadows. Now, when I walk into my apartment, I breathe easier. My name is mine again. My life is mine again. And the man staring back at me in the mirror is someone I respect, someone who didn't break under the weight of betrayal. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with clarity. And in that clarity, I found something stronger than anger. I found peace. As I set my coffee cup down on the balcony railing and watched the city lights flicker like distant stars, I let the silence wrap around me. It wasn't the silence of loss anymore. It was the silence of a new beginning, of a life reclaimed. And as I sat there, the breeze cool against my face, I knew one thing for certain: my name would never be a weapon again. It was a promise I'd made to myself. And this time, it was one I intended to keep.